Ed, welcome, or should I say e-welcome. We are e-hosting you today, and we talked about it, right? We hope that you're going to be physically, personally here the next time.
I'm looking forward to traveling again.
How is life in Russia? Ed, just, a couple of seconds, tell us what is going on over there.
You know, it's funny because everybody has this preconceived notion of how I live, what it's like, being chased by the CIA and everything like that. But it's entirely normal, as crazy as that sounds, right? I don't live in a safe house. I live in an apartment that I pay rent for like everybody else. If I bought something and owned it, unfortunately that might make me a little bit more trackable. So I have a cash-based existence. But other than that, I ride the subway, the bus, public transportation like everybody else. And my life is more than anything else defined by my work.
I have so many questions for you. Sorry for interrupting. So I have a very interesting, one thing that I would like to hear. You have good friends in Russia? Are you friends with Vladimir Putin?
I'm not. I have never met the Russian president. My life is primarily English-based, and more than anything else, internet-based. People think, oh, you live in Russia, you live in Russia. But the reality is I live on the internet. I sleep in Russia.
So I have two similar interesting comments. One says, I believe Edward is still working for CIA. And the other says, he was either a KGB agent in US or he is a CIA agent in Russia. True or false, Edward? Or you say, I can tell you, but I have to kill you. But please don't say that. We are so many people here.
Yeah, the reality is I never stopped working for the American government. That doesn't mean they pay me, right? But my mission is one of reform. I'm not trying to burn down the intelligence agencies of my country. If I had wanted to cause damage, that would have been very easy for me to do. What I want them to do is respect the values that American society was founded on, respect the Constitution that our laws are meant to be based on. And when they deviate from this, to correct that. Now, does that mean that I have some, secret loyalty to the CIA? No, I have a public loyalty to the people of my country.
So going back to 2013, can you summarize why you did what you have done and what was wrong from your point of view?
Yeah, so for those in the room who don't really remember what exactly happened in June of 2013 when I came forward and revealed evidence that the American government and many of its allies around the world, primarily part of a global surveillance network called the Five Eyes Network. This is the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. We're all working together to establish a new kind of surveillance that in the United States, the government was arguing was legal in secret to a secret court, but was never telling the public, right? And they were never arguing this in open court, in real courts, only in rubber stamp courts that always agree with them. Now, this kind of surveillance we describe as mass surveillance, indiscriminate surveillance. The government describes this through a euphemism called bulk collection. What they argue is that it's not surveillance. They're simply collecting communications from everyone anywhere they can get it, but they'll only read them if you're doing something wrong, if you come to their attention. But under the laws of my country, the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution, which you can think of as the right to privacy, it's freedom from the unreasonable search of your communications, but also the unreasonable seizure, the unreasonable capture of your communications in the first place. These things are forbidden. Traditionally, in any country, surveillance is supposed to be achieved through on the basis, compliance with a single kind of prevailing value, which is governments should always use the least intrusive means of investigation necessary to achieve their goal. This means you don't spy on the entire country, you spy on the person you suspect is a criminal. And the way you do this is you go to a court, you show the court evidence that you think this individual is up to no good. The judge decides independently if this gives sort of a sound basis for intruding into this individual's privacy. And if the judge says, yes, it is, the government begins monitoring this person specifically. Well, what I found in top secret documents was there was this new paradigm wherein the government was collecting communications, the phone records, internet transmissions, activities, your browsing history, your emails, for everyone, everywhere, indiscriminately, in advance of demonstrating this kind of individualized criminal suspicion. And they said that this individualized criminal suspicion was not necessary until the moment that they read it. And further, they said this individualized criminal suspicion only mattered if you were an American. If you were a Turk, if you were a Frenchman, if you were a German, if you were anyone else, they didn't need a warrant. They didn't need permission from any court. They could simply help themselves to reading your communications. And this, by the very international obligations that my government agreed to under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and so many other international agreements, is a violation of the basic human right to privacy. So I worked very carefully with journalists to make sure the public could see what was going on, and we, collectively, the people of my country and around the world, could decide, is this the world that we want to live in?
So many people call you a traitor and many a hero. What do you call yourself? How do you feel about yourself?
I'm a citizen, right? There is no such thing as a hero. When we say, these people are heroes, they're champions, what we're saying is they're different from ordinary people, right? They did something that I could never do. This is the wrong kind of thinking, because what we're doing is we're creating a distance between ourselves and them. The reality is the only difference between you and the person you admire most in the world are your choices. We are never more than a single decision away from becoming the kind of person that we admire.
So do you believe that your actions aided the terrorists?
No, and I'm glad to say now that we have evidence of that, right? My government very critically condemned me. They have called investigations into my activities that began in 2013 and continue until today. And despite this, despite bringing in the heads of the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the FBI, everyone with a clearance who hates me in my government, they have been asked again and again by the Congress, by the courts, can you show any evidence of damage? Can you show any evidence that people have died because of this reporting? And they have never, in a single instance, shown even a single name of a person who has come to harm as a result of these disclosures. And yet, on the other side, this reporting won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. This is the highest award for journalism in the United States. The very same president of the United States, Barack Obama, who condemned me in June of 2013, changed his language. By January of 2014, he said, well, he could never condone what I did because it might encourage other people in government to come forward. He admitted that this conversation that I started about where the boundaries of surveillance should be drawn made us stronger as a nation. The very first top secret document that was revealed by journalists based on my disclosures about a mass surveillance program of phone records of US citizens, he called for this program to be ended. He called for the same Congress that had been criticizing me so much to change the law. And this is a Congress that almost never does anything. It's very dysfunctional today. And in fact, it did. The very same courts that were quite skeptical of me said that these programs that I revealed had been operating for more than 10 years. and they found that they had never had a legal basis. They were against the law for the entire period of their operations. So we have many people in government, as you suggest, who say, oh, you know, this Snowden guy, he's up to no good. Don't trust him. He's going to cause harm. He's going to hurt people. But of course, they're the ones most embarrassed by this reporting. However, while we have just allegations of harm, just allegations of wrongdoing, we have concrete evidence of the benefits to society of now having public information about public policy. The question for you is, what do you believe should hold more weight in our public decisions?
Yeah, it is a very important question. So do you believe that surveillance and intelligence necessary to defend countries? So, you know, if yes, what is the limit of it? How do you define right or wrong? National security versus human rights. Right? I mean, should that always be a debate, one or the other?
I think there's a common presumption that you have to choose between the security of a government and the liberty of its people. But I think this is a false premise. I think one springs from the other. If you have a security state where police are monitoring everyone, they enter every home, they know what everyone is doing, we reorganize the operation of the whole of society to make things easy for the police. We haven't saved anything. In fact, we've lost everything. What we need to do is we need to focus on building the kind of society that is worth defending. And then even if there are no police on the street, the public themselves realizes that we all have a stake in protecting this, that we are all in this together. And then we help the police do their job voluntarily. We are the best policemen that anyone can have, we the citizens, because we know our neighborhoods, the ones that they don't live in, the ones where they have to drive into, the ones where they have to knock on doors. Well, that door is your neighbor, right? And you can tell this is, when we talk about the dangers of terrorism, right? In the United States, we have a long history of terrorist attacks that have succeeded and terrorist attacks that have been prevented. Mm-hmm. In almost no cases of terrorist attacks being prevented were these prevented by terrorism. They were prevented by the ordinary person who runs a food cart on the street, who sees someone drove up a truck that had a suspicious amount of canisters in the back, and they called the police and said, hey, can you check this? And the truck was a bomb, right? But because the police discovered it quickly, because of the ordinary citizen who got involved, lives were saved. No matter how much money we put into intelligence services, no matter how many rights we sacrifice to make the jobs of police easier, we will never have total safety, right? A free world is a world with risks because it provides people the opportunity to make choices. Some people will make bad choices. Some people will do bad things. But together, we can create a world that not only can survive the worst people on earth, we can actually change their minds and make them question their own rationale and make them join our side. That is the only way to defeat terrorism.
Okay, I was about to ask that question and I got my answer.
So if you become the next US president, what are you going to do differently?
I'm not running for political office, precisely because I think these are public decisions, right? I think we need to have more participation. I did not stand up, right, to tell the world how to do things. That's not my place. I wanted to give the world, the public, the citizens, you, the knowledge you need to determine how do you want to change the world for yourselves. Is this the future that you want?
That's a very important question. So, but there's another problem. You know, all these programs, the surveillance programs are being approved by the Senate, presidents, courts. Don't you think that it is too much for one person to make a decision like yourself? Don't you see any danger in that?
It's a great question. And this is one that's sort of asked again and again in the United States is, who are you to speak up, right? You have all these senior officials, these career-long politicians who saw this or knew about this and said nothing. So surely these programs are right because these people have experience, right? It's presumed that they have judgment that any one person does not. But if this were the case, why is it then that the courts did not side with the government when this information was revealed, but rather they sided with me? They didn't say these programs were legal, that the government was correct, that they should continue. They said that they were illegal, that the government's decisions were wrong. And this ultimately brings us down to the fundamental question. Is the legality of a thing equal to the morality of a thing? And I would argue that it's not. When we look at every injustice going back through history, particularly some of the most long-lasting and impactful, when we're talking about institutions like slavery, when we're talking about aggressive wars, when we're talking about genocides, societal, civilizational level conflicts, these things were more frequently, more often than not, entirely legal. At the same time, they were comprehensively moral. And this is a problem that we need to remember. The people with the most stake in our institutions, these high politicians, these top judges, begin to identify more with their institutions, with their structures of government, than they do with the public, than they do with the people. And they begin to think only about the law and not what the morality of the thing is, right? It's not a question of can you do something, it's a question of should you do something. It's not a question of are you able as a government to do something, but is it right for you to do something? And it is very, very possible, I don't want to set this aside at all, that I could have been entirely wrong in coming forward, that I could have made a mistake, that I didn't understand what I was doing. And it is precisely for this reason that I created a system, a model of working with the journalists to minimize the risks if I were wrong, to reduce the consequences, the harm that would result if I was entirely mistaken. And very briefly, because I know we've talked quite a bit about this, the model was this. I gathered evidence that I believe showed criminality of wrongdoing by the government. I provided this to journalists. This is important. I have never published a single document about the government's activities. I provided this to journalists, some of the most trusted newspapers in the world, and as a condition of access to this material, I required them to agree to two conditions. One, they publish nothing simply because they thought it was interesting or because it was newsworthy. They only publish stories if they were willing to say, as their newspaper, as their institution, it was in the public interest to know this story, to know this material in each case. And then beyond this, because maybe they get it wrong too, they would go to the government, the very government whose activities they were revealing, before they publish the story, and give the government a chance to argue against publication, to give the government a chance to say, this Snowden guy's making it up, these documents aren't real, or he doesn't understand what's going on, or you don't see the big picture here. If you publish this detail, someone will die. And in every case that I'm aware of, the newspapers did this. And this is the reason why now, in 2017, we have seen no one come to harm as a result of these disclosures. Even if you disagree with me, even if you think I'm a terrible person, even if you think I was wrong, you cannot argue with the results. The US government, the very institution that criticizes me, changed their laws in response to these disclosures. And at the same time, now years later, they have never been able to demonstrate any harm that has come as a result of these disclosures. So the question isn't, do you think I'm a good guy? The question isn't, do you think I was right? The question is, would you rather not know the truth of what's going on in your world?
So George Orwell wrote his book 1984 in 1949. So he foresaw 35 years. Hopefully he was wrong in most of the forecasts he has made. But 35 years from now, how do you envision privacy? Maybe you can write a book called 2052. I'm giving you a
homework assignment.
Yeah.
Look, we are at the atomic moment of computer science as a discipline. This is a technology of science that, as in the last century with physics, right, creates great promise. We have discovered something incredible that has the potential to liberate humanity in a new way. We have a new kind of energy that is available to our civilizations. At the same time, some people have found out ways to use this technology not for creation, but for destruction. We have the digital equivalent of an atomic problem. We have never been more vulnerable. At the same time, we are making more progress to combating this problem, to understanding this problem than we have before. But we still have enormous meshes of systems, of networks, fabrics that surround every life everywhere, even if you don't own a smartphone, even if you don't own a computer. When you go to the hospital, right, they rely on electronic records. When you try to make payments somewhere, they rely on electronic records. And many of the standards, the protocols underlying these systems were designed and built in the 1970s, the 1980s. They gave no consideration at all to security. And we see this most prominently in mobile phone networks and in payment networks. When we talk about power systems and SCADA systems, we need to be thinking about the fact that we have built in a vulnerability to the systems that we rely upon. And these will only be changed. These vulnerabilities will only be closed not through the heroic efforts of scientists and engineers who look at the problem and try to write patches and try to improve our software alone. We have to change the incentives of the people who are creating the software, who are selling the software. We need to think about who holds the liability when someone writes a program that is faulty, right? And has some consequence for either society or an individual person's life, right? If you sell a car that kills someone, the manufacturer is liable. If you sell a medicine that is faulty, the manufacturer is liable. But if you sell software that causes a problem, in so many cases, the manufacturer is not liable. It is this question that will determine which of those futures we head in the direction of. A very dark future where people, a very few select number of people, control society or control technology, and through that, control society. Or whether it is society that controls technology, and through that technology controls their future.
Mr. Snowden, do you really believe that it can happen at some point? Like society is gonna decide or realize like the power that they have? Do you think at some point it's gonna happen? Are we gonna see this? What's your hope about it?
You know, it does feel unimaginable sometimes, but think about how many things in the story of humanity have, right? It was not so long ago that women were not able to vote, right?
Yeah.
It was not so long ago that the idea of a free press in any sense, in any country, was a joke. It was not so long ago that access to the basics of daily life now, medicine, electricity, seemed like fantasies. They seemed like magic. But people's minds are not changed overnight. They're not changed in a month. They're not changed in a year. They're changed over the span of generations. And I think everyone today is aware of something that they were not prior to 2013. In 2013, right? If someone had told you the government was listening, to everything that you do, keeping records of every grandmother's phone calls that she makes,
I would believe that.
it would sound like a conspiracy, right? But we actually do have evidence that, at least in the United States, this was not a conspiracy. This was actual policy. Section 215 of the Patriot Act in the United States gave rise to what was called the Verizon Business Records Program, where the United States government made a secret deal with the largest phone companies in the United States. Primarily, the one specifically we had evidence for was Verizon. And Verizon agreed to give the government every day a gigantic list of the phone calls of all of their customers, right? It's not that someone is sitting in a room listening to everyone's phone calls. No, that's not efficient. They wouldn't need to do that. But you don't need to listen to everyone's phone calls to understand through computers what the connections between people mean. For example, anyone in the room, right? Think about if someone had a list of all of your phone calls, but knew nothing of what you said on them, what that would say about you. When I was at the NSA, we called this pattern of life analysis. I know who you called, I know when you called them, and I know where each person was, their location at the time, whether it's based on their phone networks or the cell phone tower they're connected to. And what this means instantly, right, is I know when you get up, I know when you go to bed at night. If you're using a cell phone, I know which route you take to work. I know if you're staying someplace that's not at home. I know which people you're closest to based on call frequency, right? Who are your closest business associates? Who you're probably in love with based on who you call in the middle of the night after you call a doctor because you're having some health crisis. All of these things can happen instantaneously, algorithmically through the use of computers at a very large scale. You create what's called a social graph of every person's connections. And the government argues, at least in the United States, that this is not an invasion of your privacy, specifically because they did not listen to your phone call, right? But they collected the fact that you called someone on the phone, how long you called for them, and when they did. This type of data, not listening to the actual what you said on the phone call, but just the records of the phone call, is called metadata, right? And this dynamic is called metadata analysis. This is roughly analogous to, if you want to think about it and why this matters, the same kind of information that a private detective who has been hired to follow you could collect on anyone, right? A business rival, someone that you have a romantic rivalry with, anything like that. A private detective doesn't know everything you said on the phone. They don't know everything that you said in a conversation at a cafe with someone because they can't sit right behind you. You'll go, who is this weird person that follows me everywhere? But they'll know when you left your house because they're parked outside of it. They'll know the license plate on your car and where it went. They'll know who you met with. They'll know how long you met with this person. And from just these bare details alone, they will know almost everything about you. Technology is being used to create nearly perfect records of private lives without these individuals being involved in any kind of criminal activity. And it's not because the government is evil. It is because it is cheap. It is because it has become so easy that these people think, these governments think, these investigators think, why not? Because remember, the government does not see themselves as the bad guy, and they never will, right? They'll see themselves as the police. We are trying to defend our country against terrorists. We are trying to protect our communities against criminals. So why shouldn't we give ourselves every advantage Why shouldn't we use every weapon, no matter the cost? Because our job is so important. The problem is, what happens when, by trying to save society, you are actually damaging it?
One last question, Edward. We have only 1 minute. So as we are all security people here, what do you think about the future threats regarding security and risk? Will AI end the world? Will robots kill us? What do you think? 1 minute.
I think humanity has always been the sole force able to provide so much promise to the world, and in so many cases, so unwilling to accept responsibility for its own choices. If AI ends the world, the AI will not be to blame. It would be us, right? I don't anticipate this. I don't suspect this. It is a likelihood. What we need to be focusing on are, again, the systems of incentives that our policies and our daily decisions create. We see today state-sponsored exploits, malware, things like the WannaCry attack, the Petya attack that you heard earlier in the year, where within 24 hours, over 200,000 systems were infected and locked and could not be used, shutting down hospitals in the UK and the United States, automobile factories, transportation companies, shipping companies could not continue their work because a government weapon had been stolen and released by some hacker group. It doesn't really matter who did it. The real problem is, why did the government create this weapon and keep it secret for so long when they knew it could be used just as easily against us, the public, as it could be used, if you presume even the best of behavior by governments, against the public's enemies? Software vulnerabilities are not like missiles. They aren't used once. The minute they're captured, the minute they're used against an adversary and they catch it in their logs and they reverse engineer it, they can turn this around and use it against us just as effectively. It is more equivalent to biological weapons, where people can be infected nearly limitlessly than anything else. And this is the final thought on this, sort of the policy prescription, the policy problem that we're facing, is so many people in government around the world, from the best to the worst, have prioritized the offensive operations, being able to hack and spy on our competitors, above our defensive operations, those of the people in the room who are going, how can we stop this from happening? Governments will argue, and not without any basis, that they need powers to investigate real criminals, right? Real terrorists. And no one objects to this. No one protests against this. But we need to recognize that even in a world where hacking becomes completely impossible, that is not a loss. That is a victory, because it means we can no longer be attacked through this new mechanism that is causing so much damage. And yet at the same time, even though governments may lose this one tool of investigation that's been so popular with them, they still have every other means of investigation, every other investigative tool that they have had throughout human history that still works. We can have a world that is both safe and free if we focus on protecting people rather than making them more vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you, Edward.
so much. Thank you.
It was great to host you. Hope to see you in Istanbul.
Good luck with the conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye.